Saul, thanks for taking the time, and I know you're not the chairman of the state party anymore, but folks really care about your position on issues and where you're coming out on these races. Wanted to start with the big news here in the last few days that Terry Land is dropping out of the governor's race and she's backing Mike Bouchard. What's your take?
Well, I think that was obviously great news for Mike Bouchard. I think Terry Land had a very unique situation being the only woman with 5 other members running, so everybody was kind of trying to figure out how that would play out. I think geography has played less and less of a role throughout the process. I think we saw it in the last 2 campaigns, either with DeVos or Posthumous, that the geographical balance really didn't play in too much. I mean, everybody had a home base, so to speak, but it wasn't as big as West Michigan versus East Michigan or something else like that. But clearly, I think that was probably perceptually a big move for Bouchard. It will help him a lot, and to kind of get a little kickstart going, and it'll make the race very interesting.
Now, do you have a favorite in any of these races, in the governor's race, Secretary of State?
Not right now. I'll probably get involved eventually, at least as a volunteer and make an endorsement, but I'm not really, at this stage, I'm really excited about the level of candidates we have. I mean, if you take a look at, Attorney General Mike Cox, who I think is going to be a very strong candidate, obviously Mike Bouchard, who I think probably those 2 guys are the 2 leading candidates, with, I'd say Pete Hoekstra's kind of in that top tier coming in from the west side. He's got a nice base on his congressional district and the media markets on that side of the state. I think that Rick Schneider is probably the wild card because he's somebody who can self-fund. So anytime somebody can write a check, you can actually, you don't really know where they're going to play out. We'll see how he's received amongst kind of more the conservative primary voters out there. And then I think Tom George is kind of the long shot, the underdog coming out of Kalamazoo with the smallest base and probably the smallest fundraising thing. But, good candidates, all being able to offer some good contrast to what I think Lieutenant Governor Cherry is going to bring forward. And, we've got 8 years of the same now, and we're going to get, what are they offering? Another 8 years of the same. And I don't know how much worse Michigan can be. And it's going to be a very hard argument, I think, for the Democrats to make that they ought to be rewarded with another 8 years after what they've done here.
If you were advising John Cherry, what would you tell him to run on?
I don't know. I think he has a tough time. I mean, obviously, he cast a tie-breaking vote for the largest tax increase in Michigan's history. That is not going to be something that will be easily forgotten. The Democrats, again, are talking about raising taxes. I mean, Michigan is one of the highest cost states in the country. We haven't had one structural reform in the 8 years that the Democrats have been in charge. They haven't done anything to change the way we deliver government from that standpoint. I think, again, people are going to look back and say that was bad management. That was poor decision making. They put us in this position today where we have very little choices. We're going to have to make some drastic cuts and change drastically the way we deliver government services in Michigan, or we're going to have to raise taxes, or a combination of both, neither of which will be competitive for Michigan. I think both which would drive more of our young people out of the state. The job providers, the workers are leaving the state today. A year and a half ago, 68% of all the kids in college campuses said that they planned on finding a job outside of Michigan. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. And I don't think the Democrats are giving us any policy. So I don't know. I mean, John Cherry would have to run as kind of a new Democrat and say, yes, I was part of it, but I really didn't mean it. I'm going to do things differently. He's kind of one of the more conservative Democrats running with a very liberal Democrat agenda and a liberal Democratic base. So he's probably cutting a lot of deals that he'll be able to say, I'm personally opposed to this or personally favor this, but at the same time he'll deliver on the left just like Jennifer Granholm did. I mean, let's not forget, Jennifer Granholm said she was personally opposed to abortion, but yet she was one of the most pro-abortion rights activists in the state. So just because someone has a personal position based on the politics of the party and their platform, very rarely, especially in this state with the UAW and the left-wing kind of constituencies, John Cherry is going to be a traditional left-wing governor if he's elected, and we shouldn't let him be able to fool the people of Michigan that he's going to be anything but that.
So on a scale of 1 to 10, then, what do you think are the Republicans' chances of taking back the governor's mansion?
I've got to say, I think we're a 7, 8, or 9. I mean, we've got to be in great shape. I think that the odds are that people are going to want to change. I think by the time the election actually rolls around, the Obama administration will have done enough things to have set people against the Democrats and to start looking for checks and balances. And with the Democrats in complete control of the presidency, complete control of the House, complete control of the Senate, and in effect doing whatever they want without taking input from Republicans and or conservatives, I think that at some stage the people of this country and Michigan are going to say enough is enough.
And now you're involved in national politics these days. What's your take on the Obama administration for 6 months in?
Well, I I think they did everything they promised to do and more, and everything we were worried about they were going to do and more. This has been one of the most liberal, far-reaching administrations with respects to government policies, spending, debt, and all the things that we were afraid they were going to do. You're looking at spending levels today that we have never seen in the history of this country. This year alone, Barack Obama's already spent over $1.3 or $1.4 trillion. They're estimating by the end of the fiscal year it'll be almost $1.8 trillion. That number is so large that most people can't put their hands around it. The American Enterprise Institute has a calculator that you can go on the computer and take a look on their website and figure out what kind of debt service that means for you. For my son, my oldest son, who's 20 years old, a sophomore, just finishing his sophomore year at Michigan State University, he's going to pay $114,000 in debt service alone on the Obama portion of the debt only. You put it in those numbers, it's very real. I mean, if you're going to pay $114,000 over your lifetime in debt service, that doesn't include current running of the government. So you can just imagine how much money we're going to be putting on the backs of our children and grandchildren. And I think realistically we'll never return it. So I think that's been very devastating. I think he's been very hypocritical. He talked about an open policy, that we were going to read every bill before it passed. Every controversial bill is being jammed through the legislature. Every one of them is being dropped on the floor, thousands of pages long, with very few people knowing what's in it. And it's the Democrats doing it. They talked about being for Main Street. They bailed out Wall Street. They gave basically a blank check to the people in New York, while they're making it very difficult on everybody here in Michigan and elsewhere who's actually working for a living. We had no reforms with respects to housing crisis. I mean, we didn't help the people who owned a home. We helped the bankers who gave you a loan. It's a very backwards way of doing it, and I think that's been very detrimental. He ran again telling everybody, I'm going to pull out of Iraq. I'm going to pull out of the Middle East. We're going to be home, within 18 months. Well, he's making larger commitments in the Middle East than anyone did before. I mean, basically, he's admitting, without having to admit it publicly, that John McCain was right about what was going on in Iraq. And I'm glad he's going into Afghanistan and he's not giving up there, because I do think these guys are out there to get us. These terrorists are not going to go away without us, making sure that we create some forms of democracy or change the government somehow there so that we have rational people dealing with this. But again, if you take a look at whether it's foreign affairs, domestic policy, spending and taxation, Barack Obama has basically been very hypocritical. He said one thing to get elected. He's doing other things with respects to some of the specific policies that he promised to do. No lobbyists. Once again, he hired lobbyists in the administration. He talked about not taking lobby money for him or any of the Democrats. Now what they do is say, well, only if he's in attendance, they won't take the money. So they basically have him show up at an evening event, and then they have an event an hour later or the next morning and take lobby money. So it's been a very hypocritical process. And I think, if anything, that's where he's going to run into troubles. Because even on the left, the one thing people don't like about politicians is hypocrisy. I can deal with a guy who's conservative or too liberal or too moderate, and we'll play with the issues. But I think that his hypocrisy and his double standards will come back to haunt him.